Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa and today I'm doing my FemmeFanTale wrap-up. Before I get started, I'm going to let you know that my TBR was not entirely accurate in the end. I basically switched out a book. I meant to read all the books plus the additional one, but I didn't end up getting to The Prior of the Orange Tree. Sunday evening I was about 35 pages into it and I decided I'm tired of reading books this fast. I'm gonna wait for the Monster-thon to read this and take a break for the last week of August. But I did add a book, and that was the audiobook of Akata Witch by, I don't remember, so I'm gonna put it here as I do quite a lot because I can't remember things. So let's start with that one, shall we? A little caveat before I get started. The audiobook is narrated with what I assume is a Nigerian accent because the book is set in Nigeria, and I really enjoyed the authenticity and flavor that added. But one of the reasons I was listening to an audiobook for this readathon is that I could read it while doing other things like chores and painting and things like that. While if I concentrated completely on what the narrator was saying, I could totally understand her, but combining the accent with distractions didn't work out so great, so there were a few things that I didn't completely understand or that I missed. But I still got a pretty good idea of what was going on, and I still got to enjoy the author's writing style. She's quite good with words, and I got to enjoy the plot as well and the characters. I liked a lot of aspects of that book. One thing that I actually wasn't expecting was that it was a middle grade book, or was at least surrounding middle grade characters. The main character, Sunny, is I believe 12 years old, and her fellows are ranging from her age up to 14. So in that way I actually enjoyed it more than I expected to because I loved middle grade. As you may be aware, Akata Witch is about an albino Nigerian girl. She was born in the US to Nigerian parents and now lives back in Nigeria. Just to give you some general information about it and a bit of grounding in something you probably have experienced before, the basic premise is fairly Harry Potter-esque. It is about Sunny and her 3 friends who she makes during the book. Makes friends with them, she doesn't create them. It is about them learning magic from a teacher. In a lot of ways it is also dissimilar from Harry Potter, but other similarities include that since it is middle grade, a common thing that has to be done in middle grade and sometimes also YA is that for some reason or other the children are responsible instead of the adults. The children have to save the world or accomplish something important or save some people, with the adults not really helping that much. But the way that the magic training runs is quite different from Harry Potter. It's more of an apprenticeship type thing. The teacher of these 4 has only these 4 students, or at least when he's teaching them he only has those 4. He might teach others on different days. And then each of them has to acquire a specific mentor in order to proceed much further. There is a very cool magical library, which is all built hiddly-piddly and cool and magical and has a bunch of scholars in it, and that part's really fun. Another Harry Potter-like aspect is that the family is kind of crappy. The real-world family of some of the main characters, mostly Sunny. She has an abusive father and jerks for brothers. Only her mother is worth anything, quite frankly. And another Harry Potter-like aspect, sorry to keep comparing it, but there are a lot, is that Sunny doesn't know anything about the magical world when I don't know if you can hear that, but my kitten is making loads of noise right behind the camera. Thank you, Pippin. Anyway, Sunny doesn't know anything about this magical world, whereas most of her friends have been raised in it. And so she is learning about this magical world along with you, which probably the reason that is done a lot in books is that it makes the exposition a lot less annoying and feels a lot more organic because you're learning about it with this new character, and it makes sense that all this stuff keeps getting explained because you have to explain it to this character who's never heard of any of it before. So it's quite a good technique for learning about a really wacky magical world. And I think that that's done quite well in this book. It is a very interesting magical world. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I also enjoy the magic system. A lot of the magical people's world, they're called leopards. A lot of the leopards' world revolves around learning new things, and they get something that they use for money from it. By whenever they learn a new thing, this stuff called chitin, their money, falls from the sky. Quite frankly, I don't think it works as an economic model, but it was very interesting and creative. Back to the aspect of the kids having to do everything. I do appreciate that in this story it was explained and justified fairly well. I have talked about on Twitter before. You should totally follow me. I talk about writing craft and story theory. People were talking about how most YA parents are dead. The main character's parents are dead, and some middle grade as well. And me and someone else were talking back and forth about how a lot of the reason is that if the people had parents, they wouldn't have to do these interesting things that make the story worthwhile. They wouldn't have to save the world because their parents would be doing it. And they wouldn't be put in life, they wouldn't be put in so much danger because their parents would be doing their job and protecting them. And some of the only ways you can justify kids having to do these things is, one, parents slash other protective adults are dead. Two, they're really crappy, aka Dumbledore. Or three, it's a magical world, and in this world, the parents and the other responsible adults don't have magic powers or don't have these specific magical powers needed to solve a particular problem or to defeat a particular bad guy. And in this case, that was what this author chose. She designed it so that this little group of 4 children was a specific type of magical group, and it was a fairly rare magical group, and none of these adults were in these groups. So they had to get the children to go and fight a bad guy who could only be defeated by this type of group. Which still, quite frankly, they irritated me a lot because they could have offered a lot more background support. Thank you very much. Also, multiple children of the group were disciplined several times, in my opinion harshly, in that the people use physical punishment. Not that the kid didn't deserve it. They did a very bad thing. If I knew that these adults needed me to take care of a bad guy who would destroy the world, I would say, I'm not gonna do it if you hurt me. I mean, I don't know why they didn't ever try to use that, but I would have done it. I mean, I might not have followed through on it because I like the world too. But anyway, it was a good threat. At least in Harry Potter, the adults pretended they were going to do something about it and pretended they didn't need the kids to save their butts every stinking time. Also, at one point in the book, their male teacher of the 4 of them is telling them about how healing magic works, and it's apparently, it requires concentration and something else, attention to detail, and he was like, boys are better, or the skill or the, what's it called, talent is more common in boys than in girls. Much like, think of video games. Like, boys are better at video games because they're better at attention to detail and concentration and stuff like that. And I couldn't, because of the difficulty with the listening thing, I can't be completely certain that it was the author talking and not just the character talking, and that the author didn't agree with the character. But from what I was hearing, it sounded like the author agreed with the character and was speaking through the character with that opinion. And no, just no. But I really enjoyed pretty much all the characters. The 4 especially, I really like how a lot of middle grade books will form a little squad of little, what are they called? Middle schoolers. And I really like the interpersonal relationships that they create for those kids. If I did star ratings, I would say 4 out of 5 probably. Also, despite my difficulty understanding, I would give high marks for the narration. It was very, it definitely made me feel more like I was there, because there were a couple of characters with American accents because they'd been raised in America, and the rest of the characters had different voices but all had Nigerian accents, and that was really interesting, and really made it feel more authentic. The raw footage of that was 18 minutes. I need to be shorter winded. As far as checking off the boxes, Akata Witch did a BAME, or B-A-M-E, author, and also was set in another country. But the first book I actually read for this readathon was Circe. It was a bit of a rough start because on Sunday I was super depressed, and then I was also super depressed on Monday. So there's like an eyelash or something small on my, I bet it's cat hair. It's definitely cat hair, but it's sticking to my lipstick, and it's very distracting. Anyway, it took me a while to get into this, but I did, and I was very happy with it at the start. I hadn't been sure what exactly to expect, so I was happy with how this was. It was very much trying to be as true to the myths as possible, I think, which was really nice and really interesting, because a lot of modern retellings are very loose because, well, the old stories kind of sucked a little bit, which definitely impacted some of how I felt about reading this book. Basically, Circe is about a particular character from the Odyssey, I assume. The long story that has Odysseus in it. Yes, the Odyssey, which was written in the Wayback Times, and is all part of Greek mythology, basically, and is written about Greek mythology involving the gods of Greek mythology. Can I explain it any worse? And so Circe herself is a goddess, and so during a lot of the book she is surrounded by other gods and goddesses, and in the original tales of the Greek, I can't remember if it's Parthenon or Pantheon. Those are two different things. I can't remember which it is. But anyway, the Olympian gods, they sucked. They were bad people. They were like the Viking gods, those ones, Thor and such, were kind of bad. The Olympians were really just bad people. So there's a lot of that in here, and it's not enjoyable to read about her being around those people, but it is informative and very true to the originals, which is not something, like I said, that you get a lot nowadays, because people don't want to put up with reading that. Another really interesting thing was that this Circe character is, in the original stories, only involved in a couple of major events, whereas the author has pulled from other sources such as the Iliad and other Greek myths and has involved Circe in those, even though she wasn't originally involved. So we get to have basically a tour of Greek myth and interesting happenings via this goddess's life. One of them is Daedalus and Icarus, which, by the way, is a story I particularly hate. On top of being really sad, the whole feathers melting when glue melting when you get close to the sun thing is just really irritating, because that's not how altitude works. Granted, the sun is also not Helios going around us, but still, I would think that ancient Greeks could have climbed a mountain and figured out, oh, it's colder up here than it is down below. Maybe being close to the sun doesn't make it hotter. Anyway, then there are several other tales that she is inserted into while maintaining the original character traits that were described in the Odyssey. The part of her story that actually happens during the Odyssey is I'd say about halfway into the book, to 3/4. As is common with a lot of other fairy tale and myth retellings, there's a lot of detail added and a lot of characterization, and we are given enough information about the characters to actually like them and care about them, whereas in myths and legends and stuff, there's usually so little detail. It's a lot more about the plot than about the characters, and so in that way she has adapted to modern storytelling, and that's why I ended up liking this. Cersei is quite a likable character. Every once in a while she meets some other people who are also very likable. Two things that stand out in a negative way, kind of, are that one, the middle chunk of the book, like the middle 2/3, I'd say, especially the middle third, is super sad and depressing. It's all about Cersei being alone and everyone she meets being mean to her. Kind of the whole book is that, but especially the middle third. And also there's quite a lot of existential dread from the second and third thirds, which loneliness and existential dread are two things that I read to get away from. So in that way, not terribly pleasant to experience that in a book. But I did appreciate there was a lot of talking about how she'd be surrounded with people, especially the gods, and be very alone because they were all jerks, and she didn't really fit in because she wasn't a jerk. One of the things I really liked about this is that Cersei is a witch, and I am big at specifically a potion brewing type witch, where she gets her magic from the herbs and such that she compiles, and so that was really cool for me because I love potion making. Several of my main characters that I write are potion makers. I love the whole thing. When I had a couple of chemistry and biology classes with labs, that was my favorite thing. I just think that having natural components and putting them together in some interesting way and cooking them a certain extent and such makes them into something else and can make them have cool powers. Also, light spoilers, the end, it ended happy. So if a book ends happy, I can deal with the fact that it was sad in the middle. If it had ended unhappily, I would have come away much more depressed from it than I did. But I was sufficiently unhappy afterwards. Oh, and another thing that I appreciate is that I was thinking as I was reading this that I would have to go and look up the Odyssey and the Iliad and all those things to figure out how close this was to the originals and like how much she mixed and matched. But there's actually information about that right in the back of the book. There's stuff about where all the characters are written about in ancient myth and about what their story originally was, so you can figure out how much she changed it. I really, really like that. So that was Cersei by Madeline Miller. Then after that, I decided I really didn't want to start reading Priory of the Orange Tree because it was another epic type fantasy and it was going to be emotional and deep and stuff, and I just didn't need to deal with that right then because I was very emotional from the ending of Cersei and from every part of Cersei, and so I started reading this instead, A Tale of Two Castles by Gail Carson Levine, which was on my TBR. It was my middle grade read. I read this before a really long time ago, forgot the plot. However, as I was reading, I remembered the plot, and so I remembered particularly Count Jonti who is an ogre who is also a count. He's not a green ogre, I don't think, from the description. He's just a giant, basically. Bigger than Hagrid, but smaller than Hagrid's half-brother. And this is a tale of two castles, and one of the castles is owned by Count Jonti and one is owned by the king, who is not a nice king, but Count Jonti is a very nice count. And I remembered immediately when I read his name that Count Jonti was a very nice count. And as I had remembered, the dragon goes by the honorific Masteress because their gender is unknown. You must have heard that. That was my stupid cat. He's begging for pets. Come here, you. Yeah. You bug for pets while you lay there lazily, you're gonna get picked up. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Oh, yeah. It is about the young girl from the cover going to another town away from her parents. By the way in which this middle grade justifies the fact that a little kid is getting into all sorts of danger and stuff is that her parents are super poor and had to send her away from themselves in order to get an apprenticeship. So she's gone to another city away from her parents, and she fairly quickly finds friends there because she's a really cool and interesting person and people like to be around her. Yes, you don't like to be picked up. You don't like it, do you? No. And so one of the friends she makes is this here dragon. She is the assistant of the dragon, not the apprentice, because apprentices are unpaid. She gets paid by the dragon because the dragon actually values her. Granted, also is not necessarily teaching her a trade, except that she totally is. She's teaching her a sleuthing trade, specifically the art of deducing, inducing, and something else that I can't remember. The dragon is a investigator of sorts. She solves minor mysteries like missing persons, but mostly missing stuff. Who stole this from me type mysteries. Hello, Pippin. The reason that Count Jonti gets involved in this little lady's life is that he has had a dog go missing, his best friend dog, and he goes to Mistress for to have them find the dog, which eventually leads to all sorts of adventures because there ends up being a threat on the Count's life, and Mistress wants to save him because she really likes him even though the whole town doesn't. How you can dislike anyone named Jonti I have no idea. Basically, it's another of Gail Carson Levine's excellent middle grade fantasies, which I highly recommend. By the time I finished that one, it was Friday, so I decided that instead of tackling the 800 pager, I would tackle the 300 and some pager, which is Summon the Keeper by Tanya Huff. As I said in my TBR, I bought this because it had a tuxedo cat on the front. Tuxedo cats are my favorite, even though I love avocado. I love tuxedo cats the best. And this cat is in fact a major character in the book. He talks, and he is a sassy little cat, which would be expected from any cat character. And he's very insistent about being fed all the time, and he is old, so he gets geriatric cat food, which he does not appreciate. He really added a lot to the book. Really excellent. This is one of at least 3 keeper novels by this author, which is about keepers are people who monitor basically places where people have messed up with magic and have caused rips in the fabric of reality where magic leaks through and causes problems. The keepers are summoned to wherever they need to be by an unknown force. They can just feel a pull towards a place where they need to be going to fix something, and I really like that because as I said in my TBR, I'm writing a character who is a seer who has very similar operating methods, and that theme of things happening the way they're meant to continued throughout the book, and I really enjoyed that. Also, it was funny reading this book directly after Cersei because some retired Olympians show up in this book, and it was really funny to read about Zeus, Hera, Poseidon's wife, whose name I can't remember, Hades, Persephone, Hephaestus, and Aphrodite, and Hermes in this vastly different context with a vastly different method of retelling, including Hermes being quite nice. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the reason that a bunch of retired Olympians show up is that our main character, the Keeper, has become, as it says on the cover, is running a B&B where Hel is one of the guests. She has been summoned to this little B&B where there is one of these rips in reality that is letting bad magic seep through, specifically, supposedly, opening to Hel, meaning it is where a lot of evil magic is leaking out and very demonesque people are trying to come through and also like influence anyone who is in the B&B, which by the way you get to hear the thoughts of these demony people quite a lot, and it was which is very funny. It's done very comedically while also being reminiscent of the Screwtape Letters, much less upsetting to the psyche than the Screwtape Letters, but it did very much remind me of that, but a lot lighter. And so other creatures come to this B&B as well, including a vampire, some werewolves, and on Halloween night, a bunch of other weird creatures. Also, there's a ghost in this B&B who is a major character, which means that if you are going to be taking part in the Monsterathon next, whenever, in September, this could count for the haunts prompt about having a dead or undead character, and also could count for having the traditional horror monsters in it, but with the ghost, the vampire, the werewolves, all of those things being involved. The main plot is about how Claire, the main character, takes quite a long time figuring out how to close this rift and stop this evil leaking through, with quite a lot of fun and interesting magical stuff going on along the way. I loved it. It was a really good way to end my readathon. So that was how I did. I will hopefully be reading Prior to the Orange Tree during September. I will also be reading a whole lot of other books during September, which I'll be filming the TBR for very soon. If any of you took part in the FemmeFanTale Readathon, tell me how it went for you below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!